So to begin with, I guess I like to put all my, thank you for the intro, and I'm glad to be back. I enjoyed presenting to you guys last time. I think we had a lot of fun. And this time, we're going to present a topic that's, I suppose, near and dear to my heart, PSGraph, which is a module that I wrote. But just to begin here, I like to keep all of my presentations out on GitHub. I think that makes it very easy for viewers to always be able to go just download the zip to get all of my files and scripts. If they're not familiar with GitHub, it's a one-click away to get the full package here. So with that, I'm going to jump into my demo slides here, and let's see how Zen mode works for us. Okay. So PSGraph. Oh, get all the way. So PSGraph is it's a module that lets us build graphs with using just PowerShell. And I've always been a fan of Visio. I've just never been a fan of automating Visio. Like, I've never found the right framework that let me build the diagrams that I really wanted to build. And so through my hunt, I found an open source module or program called GraphViz that had its own text-based language for describing graphs and could generate images of various formats. And I had been writing little wrapper scripts around it for a while, and I eventually formalized it into an actual module here. So that's a long way of me saying that my PSGraph is really just a front end, a friendly interface to the GraphViz engine. And if you need more in-depth details on topics, sometimes the reference information off their website will translate very, very closely to what I've done with PSGraph. So in my demo script, I've got the first couple of steps to bootstrap your system. If you're using Chocolatey, you can do the find package and install GraphViz off their repo. If you're on Linux or Mac, I'm sure there's some others. If you download and load it into your default locations, my module should auto-discover it. Then my stuff is always on the gallery, so you can always do the find module and install it to your local system. So let me import my module to make sure it's loaded. And then I have several commands here that I'm going to walk through each of these. But this module is implemented as a DSL, right, a domain-specific language. So I use commands that are very specific to what you'd use for generating a graph, like a graph and edges and nodes. I'll kind of explain what these mean as we go through them, but the command list is actually fairly short here, and we can do quite a bit with that. Let's grab the most basic of graphs. So you'll notice I use like a Hester-like syntax where I define a graph as a script block that runs a couple commands. And we're going to make a node named home, a node named work. We're going to draw one line between the two of them. We pipe the output to my export PSGraph, and I can save it to any location that I want. So let's go ahead and first generate our graph so we kind of see what we're looking at. And then I'm going to open our graph up, and it's super simple, right? I got home, my first node, my second node, and the line between them. And now the nice thing about GraphViz is I only need to call out a node if I'm doing something special with it. So if I'm just drawing edges, lines from nodes, it realizes it needs to put the node on the graph. So here's a case where I basically draw an edge from home to work and then work to home. And I use a shorter syntax here with just show graph to save the step of saving it to a file. So running this one, and that's going to be annoying, but I get my two edges and it auto adds each node. So super simple syntax for a very simple graph.
Hey, can I just interrupt you a second? So I'm just trying to understand this so I can apply this more and how as you're moving, and I can think of better questions. Graph is basically just like making flowcharts. Is that what it is, or is it?
Yeah. So yeah, I suppose I should clarify the definition, right? So for this module, they're basically like node edge-based directional graphs. You know, so it's not like the bar charts or whatnot you get out of Excel, but more I'm defining relationships between items and then graphing them visually. I will step into some like concrete examples of doing, you know, like processes and dependencies or like network connections as to get a good visual of what you can do. But I want to make sure we have like, so I'm going to start with like my basic syntax. So as I'm doing those more complex examples, we can almost plain text read what's happening and get a feel for what the graph should look like. That make sense? Right?
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out the application of what would I use this for, like in that kind of fashion. So you could use it for some visualization. So it's taking a representation of some data and putting it into a visualization for a graph form, right?
Yes. In fact, let me go take a peek at the gallery here of graph is that just shows the types of graphs that could be generated. You know, get like state machines, org charts. You can do I suppose here's the models that is supported by GraphViz that are non-infrastructure related, I guess. And my examples that I'll dive into will hit more closer to home. But here's like an entity relationship type of a diagram. But if you have stuff like an organizational chart, right? If you have things that relate to something else, and you want to see it visually, that's where a tool like this will stand out for you.
Cool, great, thanks.
No, good questions. Okay, so continue on with basic syntax and just working with the graph. Sometimes you can actually just save the output to a variable. Now you generally don't ever need to look at the output unless you're doing advanced graph stuff. But I'm really translating my syntax to the GraphViz syntax, and then my export command just passes it over to that engine to do the heavy lifting. So let's take a peek at this edge for drawing edges. Not only can I draw from individual nodes, I can give it an array or a collection of nodes. And in this example, it would draw an edge from A to B to C to D and then back to A. So it kind of makes its own little circle there, and connects the collection serially. So if we run this, we'll see it grabbed each of those nodes, it created nodes for each of those, and then did the direction between all of them. And I'll make heavy use of that later. We can make stuff prettier by using attributes. So like I support a really short syntax, so I can actually skip to in the from. So basically I have a first node and a second node, and it will do the lines to them. But from, to, and if I specify attributes, I can give it the edge itself a custom label or give it colors. And I do make heavy use of positional parameters. So while if you love being more verbose or like the shorter syntax of just specifying your attributes, both are handled quite gracefully. So this demo should show the colors change and labels placed on a specific edge. And then nodes themselves also have attributes. So here I'm giving this node a name home, but I actually want to, every node has a unique identifier to it. It's generally the name of it, and you draw edges between those unique identifiers. But sometimes you may actually want to have a unique identifier for the node itself, but give it a nice friendly label when presenting it to the end user. So I'm quite often using label to give it custom text and changing the shape to adjust the way it looks. So in this case here, I'm going to add the my house label to home, and I'm going to label work as Loan Depot. And then later on, I can create my edges, you know, from one node to the next, and those labels will still hold true. So when we run this chunk of code, we get those custom labels, even though my identifiers are unique underneath. And this gets, before I jump ahead, there are a whole slew of attributes and properties that can be used for the nodes. Some of them aren't used in all output formats, you know, so like I'm doing PNG files for most of this demo, but if later on I generate a HTML click map or use it to generate an HTML page, you can create zones where you can actually click on links, and it'll interpret those correctly. So tons of options built into it, and if you ever need to see the full list, you can actually go to the GraphViz documentation directly, which I have linked in here. As I scroll through this giant list, like it feels almost endless, a number of things that can be customized as far as for edges and nodes. They can give you really unique looks and give you the style that you're looking for when building your graph. But the ones I use most commonly are generally the shape, the label, and the color. I use those three all the time throughout most of my scripts. The other ones, they're hit or miss if I ever need to go take a peek at them. And then we can also set attributes to like a default, like say something like that, all nodes get the shape of a box, all edges get this color purple, and then I can just call them individually without having to repeat these attributes over and over anytime I'm doing an edge or a node. So here we can see I get this box shape and these purple edges. But the important thing to note is it's like top-down processing. So it's more like I have nodes without attributes, and I want to change the default halfway through. The default will only apply to the stuff further down in the list. So it processes stuff in order and adds those as it goes along. So if I run this one here, we'll see that the first node, home, should still be an oval or a circle, because this node default doesn't come into place until halfway through the script. Oh, that's too fast. Sorry, let me know if I'm flashing these a little bit too fast. I've seen these 100 times, so I always know what I'm looking at. Yeah, so I got my nice oval default node at the top, my color applied, and my my box applied to the individual node.
Now, Kevin, here you're also just outputting PNGs and stuff like that. There's kind of some discussion about other formats, and you've referenced being able to do other attributes. Is that just another, you know, export PSGraph as PDF? And
yeah, so I got like.
Okay, that's what I thought. So I didn't bother to look just yet, but.
Yeah, so I got output formats, and I have Oh, let me crack open. So I'm going on a small tangent here. So I do support a good range of the output. I mean, I'm basically just passing parameters back to GraphViz on what formats it supports. And so GraphViz has been a really robust application that's been around for quite a while. So they have added quite a bit of features to it. Not Windows, Workspace, PSGraph. Actually, started a new window, open, didn't I? All right, file, open folder. And export PSGraph. And I think, so my quick list here is that I know that I've added auto-completion mappings for. JPEGs, PNGs, GIFs. It's actually like the IMAP. And I'll do a demo at the end where I actually do create some clickable images. So we support PDF, plain, SVG. I know GraphViz supports many more than this, so if you find one that you need, it's just a pull request away for me to add it to this validation set for the most part. Okay. And then we can also specify attributes for the graph itself, which I kind of do these more in line here before I define the contents of the graph. And the two most common attributes I use for a graph is a label to give it a proper heading, and they have a feature called a ranked, which lets it go from left to right when so sometimes the nodes go from top to bottom by default. LR goes left to right. And I find that when I'm doing graphing stuff that has wide items on it, like server names or endpoints like URLs, I almost find that the left to right flow just tends to present a little bit better. Okay. So
another question somebody asked about custom images. Does PSGraph respect image source for a node?
Yes, you can do custom image sources for nodes and custom icon sets. I don't have any examples where I'm doing custom images, but I do know that actually GraphViz even supports you dropping in HTML into the nodes. Like if I get to an HTML in the label, and it's not the full HTML spec, but it does have a good coverage of a lot of the, like the table and the headings and bolding and image sources that you'd probably want. I don't have any examples of HTML in here either, but so like GraphViz itself, there is a ton of features, and I use maybe 10% of it personally, right? But everybody uses a different 10%. Mm-hmm. And that's, I suppose, one of the beauties of it. And I tried to make my wrapper of PSGraph as light as possible to pass as much through to GraphViz. So while I'm making very friendly edges and nodes, to me, right, this is basically just a hash table. And whatever keys you put in there, I'm going to pass them to GraphViz as you present them. So if you do something that it doesn't support, GraphViz will come back and say, I don't support this key. But that also means if they ever update GraphViz and add new attributes, I kind of gain support for that automatically. Like I'm trying not to filter or get in the way of somebody that really knows how to do a lot with GraphViz.
So Kevin, there's a few guys that are asking about, and I'm foreshadowing. I bet you're going to tell us. Just wait and see. But some guys are asking about, like, you have a success story that you can speak about that like helped sell this to management or anything like that. And I have a feeling you probably have something like that in later demos. I don't know if you.
I do. Yeah, I'm gonna get a couple more syntax things I want to touch on, and I'll show some actual like infrastructure diagramming, and then we'll do some data-driven diagrams.
It's like you read the chat, because that's what was being asked.
Cool. So to down some just points that where was I? Duplicating nodes, right? So I mentioned that the name is special, and if I want to have a node on there more than once, like in this case, I'm drawing multiple edges, and I'm going to get this nice graph that shows from home to work, or work to lunch and back to home. This is the circle, but I might have mentally wanted to have work to be like a circle instead, have them show up twice. And I mean, the short answer to make that happen is, well, I got to give it a different name. And while that does put them on there twice, now it says two different things, right? And that's where I want to make the point that you can label this differently than what its identifier is. And that's what I'm going to do here. So I'm going to label both these nodes to say Loan Depot as a way to have him on here more than once, but showing the label that I want. Now, I kind of don't like the positioning of these. Like, I almost want a nice, beautiful circle out of this. And that brings me to my last new keyword, which is rank, which lets me give a hint that says, put these things on the same level. So it's trying to auto-flow and lay things out for you. But if you want to rank things of equal importance or in a line, you use the rank keyword. And rank keyword, and we will see it show them at the same level. I'll use this for like, I don't know, if I'm doing some network diagrams where I have load balancing stuff that tends to get shifted out of alignment, I can use the ranking to align stuff back in again. I guess I do have one more keyword here, which is the subgraph, which is if you basically want a graph inside of a graph. All right. And this is the case where I'm basically going to put a box around the stuff that's outside of my home. So the subgraph will say the node lunch where my home node is outside of it. And showing that, I can get this box around this set of nodes separate from this other set. I will say that there are times where I want to use subgraph, but it tends to make things more complicated. I've wanted to use it a lot more than I've actually used it. Like there's times where I felt like a box here would be perfect, but I found it would distort the layout in a way that just wasn't pleasing. Often I found just better ways to present the data. Okay, so that's it for like general syntax. And I want to step into something that might be getting a little closer to home, right? So here's an example, super basic, of doing a like a server infrastructure, if you will, right? Like I have a diagram where I want a load balancer that has a connection to the website. Website connects to the API, and the API connects to the database. So it's almost like a like a multi-tier application. So that I run this, I see exactly what I described. And that's what I was missing in Visio, was being able to describe what I wanted using a simple syntax and actually getting it to generate what I was looking for. And continuing with this, what if we wanted to add servers to the list, right? So I'm going to start adding arrays for my nodes and edges. So here's a case where maybe my server name is Web1 and Web2, where I have two servers. Let me rank them together. Let me have my load balancer connect to my web server list. My APIs, my websites connect to my APIs, and my APIs connect to my database. All right, so when I run this, we'll see all of those nodes like cross-link and look at each other, or point to each other. And this is where, well, one, where some of the features I've added to PSGraph start giving you value over what Graph does natively. Traditionally, you'd have to draw, you have to mark out each of those edges that you'd want shown, where I know in this scenario here, this edge, I'm saying that I want to cross multiply these effectively where everything here should connect to everything here. And it's going to do Web 1 to API 1, 2, and 3, and Web 2 to 1, 2, and 3. And it generates that list for us. Like the raw syntax, has to break those out individually. And that's what PSGraph is kind of doing for us. So this is all nice and all, but I'm still hard coding lots of servers in here. The beauty of PowerShell is we can start substituting in variables for these exact same things. So now I can use variables to reference these items, web servers, APIs, and databases. And I go back to my graph, my PSGraph diagram, and I can go back almost that first syntax where I'm saying, my nodes are web servers, connect my load balancer to my web servers, connect web servers to API servers. It's very natural language descriptive of what I want to generate. And this is the exact same graph as before, I believe. But I had a few more nodes. And now that I'm pulling it from an array, I can quickly add a fourth and a fifth website, or a sixth or a seventh, API to the list. Or we just make it all data driven, right? And that's where you start to get real value out of a module like this is, I'm not going to hard code that list. I'm going to go pull from my source of truth, right? So in this case, I'm pulling from a CSV, but this could be an Active Directory groups. It could be your CMDB. Wherever your list of servers lives, you can query it, pull the information. Here I'm taking, so my CSV, let me take a peek at it real quick. View. So in this case, something super simple where I've got a name, a role, and an IP address for my servers. I'm loading the same variables as before, filtering by the roles. Execute this. And I have the same syntax as I had before, where I say web servers to API servers, API to the database. And when we run this, we get, all right, I know it gets kind of crazy the more nodes you have, but it automatically is adding these now based off my data sets. So as I add more servers to my domain or to my central system of record and rerun this, this will grow and shrink appropriately. And then adding IP addresses, right? I have IP information. Let's get that on the diagram. So the one change I make is at the very bottom here. I loop over all the servers. I create a node reference, like I say for this node, and I'm using the computer name as my unique identifier. I add a label. I'm going to add a label that shows both the computer name and then the IP address. The /n is to make it a new line, so it breaks it up into 2 lines on this diagram. So running this, same set of data, with just that extra line. It's getting more crowded, but I actually see IP addresses on this diagram, or any other information you want to present, right? Like I'm just doing IP addresses as the quick demo, but you could do small tables in these, like I said, HTML is supported, but it's dynamically presenting this information.
Hey Kevin,
how big that form goes, give it more space, because all those lines, it just gets so clumped. Can you spread that out so it's more visible, or? Yeah,
so you can go to the attributes and add like minimum spacing. There's all kinds of knobs you can tweak on those. And you're right, and you will notice like the more nodes you have, the more dense stuff gets. And
But effectively,
monsters, I call them spaghetti monsters. It's very easy to get those if you're graphing too much data.
Okay, so but if you're playing with this and you can do that, and you would use this, you could just import it as an attribute.
Yep.
And then and what the attributes you're looking for is you'd reference out back to GraphViz in order to get that data.
Absolutely.
Okay. So if we wanted to do it, we could do it, but we just pass it back out to GraphViz. There's
also different layout engines. I think there's like circular. So GraphViz itself has multiple layout engines. The default one does a hierarchy. And I mean, this one makes sense to do a hierarchy. But I often, as my graphs get large, especially with nodes that reference multiple nodes, like almost like circular type references, I will walk my list of layout engines until I find the one that gives me the best look. Spring models, small, medium. For the most part, the default one works the best in most cases, but there is an occasion where the circular graphs or one of the other layout engines just might give me a better look.
Hey Kevin, just real quick, a couple of people were wondering, you're actually rendering these live. These are not pre-mades that you're just pulling up, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's what we thought.
Yeah. So I'm doing these live. You know, I can make my web server's color equals red. If I run this now, this one I changed, yeah. We'll see that whole row is red. In fact, that actually leads into my next, I already did the IP addresses. We can actually add real-time checks to these graphs. No, not to the graphs, but at rendering time. I've got a fake test server connection function here that's randomly going to return true or false to simulate a failure of like, I don't know, 20%. Or, yeah, 20% failure rate, I guess. So let me load this function. And then in my graph, it's getting a little bit more ugly, but on my node, so for each server, I'm going to test the connection and set my color to green if it succeeds, set a color to red if it fails, and then when I call my node, I just assign the color as part of the attribute. Like this here's still my hash table. I've kind of let it wrap over a couple lines. So now I'm doing a live health test, if you will, is what I'm simulating. So every time I run this now, you know, I say, you know what, I've got 2 nodes that are down, but the cluster looks healthy. You know, I come back 15 minutes later to see how things are going, run this again. And I got a different set of nodes that are having issues. So yeah, all the graphs I'm doing here are generated real time. Okay, so like those align with stuff I'd probably be doing in Visio. I suppose the other classic example is the organizational chart. And this is the scenario where you have a set of data that defines its own relationship, right? Before I was defining roles, you know, web talks to API and API talks to database, pretty hard-coded in the graph. But in this example here, I might just have an organizational chart that has, you know, list of names and like a manager field, and I'll basically use the ID as a primary key, and I'm going to link them to whoever their manager is. So I've got, you know, 20 so records in this example here. Let's do my org chart. Set my nodes as rectangular. I find that's one of the best shapes. I'm going to enumerate for each person, basically. I'll do a for each. Draw my node. I'm using the ID as the name, my unique identifier. And then my label is going to say the name and the title. That's what I'm doing with the substitution in here. And then below, I'm taking all my people and filtering where there is a manager, right? Since the CEO doesn't report to anybody, at least not in that org chart. I'm drawing an edge from the manager to, I'm drawing a line from my manager to myself if I'm in the position of the people. So let's run this graph here. And this is the first truly data-driven diagram. And I can see all the reports, how it flows dynamically and automatically. So, maybe it's your Active Directory you could be walking that shows, managers and reports. This one here is pretty top level heavy. I don't see enough staff for management. And I can see that now. And that's what I love about diagramming and visualizing stuff, is that it's super easy to see that they have hardly any staff doing the work, and they probably have lots of management sitting in meetings, Seeing data can sometimes tell you things that you just wouldn't notice by looking at a list of names. Chart. Now, I do have an alternate syntax, so I'm going to keep the same list of people. I found this pattern was so common in all my graphs and charts that I made a simpler syntax for me for handling this scenario. So the same thing, I actually support giving node the full list of objects and providing a couple script blocks for it to pick out what should be the ID. And then on the label, giving a script block for it to process for each node how to label it. And I have the exact same thing for my edges, right? I say, here's my nodes, which is these objects, which have an ID and a name and a title. And I'm filtering on whether there's manager, and then I use a from script and a to script to identify the relationship. These are basically equivalent as the diagram above. To me, this feels cleaner, but I've been staring at it for so long that it's just easy for me to look at. So I generated the exact same chart as I had before with the other item. Perfect. Okay, so let's do some more fun graphs. Okay, so these are going to be live graphs based off of my local system. This one here, let's grab all of the processes on my system. And then just taking a quick peek here, I'm going to show the process name, the ID, and the parent process ID. And that's why I'm using the sim instance instead of get process, because I know I've got the parent process ID in this list. So when I run this, this table just flew by. But as you can probably already guess, I'm going to use this as the node name, the ID. The parent ID is the relationship, and then give the label of the process name. And I'm using that newer syntax here. So I'm going to say, in this case, left to right. I felt like this looked better that way. Give me the shape of a box. The node for every process. Use the process ID as the node name. And then for each attribute, the process name. And then my edge below it, do the same thing and map those properties. So now when we run this guy, we get a diagram here of all the processes on my system. Let's zoom in on something. Like, oh yeah, here's VS Code. I can see it's calling VS Code, is loading VS Code, and I got PowerShell running in it. I can scroll up to something else. Chrome has lots of Chrome tabs open. You know, they all parent off of Explorer. But anyways, it just, the impact of being able to see a system live and kind of just browse it and see like what's calling everything here. You know, services.exe. Like I got way too many services in this box. Yeah, so here's like a live diagram of the system. And we can keep going, like network connections. If I do a NetStat where I find the connections that are perfect, and they load, actually if I take a peek at this guy so we see what's in this data, we haven't used it much. I'm basically looking for, you know, local address, remote address, and the port, right? And that's a relationship. So let's diagram those things. My edge parameter, what am I doing here? Node is my whole NetSet object. I'm using my, like the full collection of objects, defining from, to, and my attributes, this time, I'm actually going to show the local port and the remote port that's connected to my system. So this one now, if I run this, and execute that, I've got a live diagram of all the systems I'm connected to. I can see here, whatever system this is, I'm connected to it twice. Like there's two different entries, and it drew a line for each one of them. I noticed my local host is talking to himself like a crazy amount of times. I have no idea why. It was only like 3 the other night, but maybe it's something worth investigating. You know, it's a little for like just troubleshooting, like being able to track down, you know, what's talking to what. This is a beautiful tool for that.
Kevin, I don't know if you're looking at the chat, but there is just like a room full of people here that are like blown away by the range of the tool that you have made here. I mean, this is like pretty damn amazing what you've built. So,
and the thing of it is, you're only bound by your creativity, right? And that's the beauty of this thing is all I'm really doing is saying I have a node and I'm connecting two things. You can just imagine things that you can connect and relate to each other. That's a diagram for you that you can create. I took a while to find these demos, so I'm like, okay, what's a good repeatable demo that I can do that's live, and just these attributes of the local system are beautiful. If you've loved those, this next one's actually one of my favorites for a demo, is that I can combine the two of these, right? Because if you do a NetStat, you know what process it has that connection. So let me figure out what my local connection is right now. I think I will use this one.
We may need to take 45 seconds here for some people to get their brains working again. People are like kind of blown away right now.
All right, well, I'll let it rest after this one because this is the one that
I'm kidding, but I mean, it's not that it's too much to process. It's just the ability of how fast you can do stuff is really mind-boggling.
Absolutely. Okay, process, or there's a process in the NetStat list. So I'm filtering on the owning processes so I don't get too much noise in this. We're going to, here, let me just generate this one, then we'll walk through it. So when this one runs, this is now the processes on my system and what they're talking to. So I can see I got, 3 connections from Link, Cylance is talking to this server, Chrome, these are the sites I probably have open in my browser. And again, like trying to figure out what process is talking to what remote system over what ports. Like I said, for troubleshooting, this is like a dream come true, really. And then just to reflect on that, it's the diagram doesn't look any more complicated than it did before. So I walk. Oh, I'm jumping here. I didn't mean to jump. I give each node an ID, give it the process name, which is pretty standard. And then I walk the NetSet list to map the owning process to the remote address instead of the local address this time. And because the owning process ID and this ID are the primary keys, they'll always map together. And that's really what you want to find when you want to think about what you want to map is like the value that you're looking up and referencing to. If you can find a value on your object that's of the same type, like in this case, it's the ID, your graphs will just fall together. You may have to create like lookup tables to make a translation, you know, like I've had, what would be a good example? Maybe I just have two disjointed systems that use a different syntax for the same thing. You know, like I might have load balancers that say I'm in this network segment, but my servers are in this data center. And you can use like a hash table to like build that mapping. And what I mean by that is the from scripts on this, I can actually say like, okay, I have a map that if I give it an owning process, it will give me the value I need that will do the mapping back to something else. And that's the value of having a script block here, is that you can actually do, or, you know, get a special ID, right? Like whatever your function is to give you that mapping of that ID, you could call it for each item. And that's like, yeah, where all the power in the world comes from. Services, this one isn't near as exciting, but it is something we can graph. Sometimes you can create like just a dashboard of all the services that are running. Like there's a lot on this. I've no relationships yet, but I have colors saying one is up, one is down, you know, or one is running, one isn't running. So that's an option. If that's the type of data you want to see and present, you do that. But the nice thing about services, why I started down this path, is that they do define who they depend on. So doing another hierarchical example here, I'm going to get all my services, and I'm going to map. We're getting more creative here. All my services using the node name. The label is the display name this time. And I'm giving it a color based off the status, if it's running or not. Blue will be running, red will not be running. And then my link services, I am finding the services that have a depends on. Then I draw edges for each of them using the from name to service depends on dot name. And I think I'm still using the hierarchical layout here. This is the default. I don't know why I have it in here. Maybe I was experimenting, trying to find a better view. I'll just trim that off. If I run this now, we will show the diagram of all the services. We have some that don't really tie to much, but we have others on here that so much depends on remote procedure call. And in this one, I like this diagram too, because it also lets me show one more gotcha with leveraging graph is that the IDs are case sensitive. So here's a case where some are saying remote procedure call in all lowercase, right, that these things depend on. And then I have another spot here, I'm pretty sure it's on the same chart, where they decided to use all caps. And so by default, it's case sensitive, but I do have a way to handle this scenario. Because I knew that I'd run into various node formatting scenarios. I added what is basically a custom node format script. If case sensitivity is your problem, you do to lowercase everything for the node ID. So let me run this to show a quick example. If I run this now, like actually, let me just run this out first. Show my problem set. So here I've got my cases mismatched, right? Like I hand typed it, I fat fingered it. It created both nodes, but I actually want this to be one node. So I'd add the to lower on here as a way to interject custom formatting, and it now will lowercase everything. Now the problem is it lowercase everything, but you could add a custom label to do whatever you wanted. And if you ever need to reset it, you can do just set node script by default, and it goes back to normal. This is important if you ever have special characters in your ID that GraphViz tends to care about and complain about. You could add a custom node format script to do like a substitution for the ID to still make it unique and use what you want. But if you're using like, I don't know, quotes or colon actually is a weird one that throws something off. But anyways, there's options, just be aware of to tweak that. So doing this full graph now, setting the node format script to lower with my same dependent services. We should now get everything, one instance of remote RPC, and they should all point to each other. So now when I zoom into this spaghetti mess, and it renders for me, everything is hiding here, and I don't have those hanging references like I had before. Any of them I do have that are hanging happens to be something that says, I depend on this, but I don't actually have a service with that name to get a label on it. It's just a weird nuance I'm supposed to be aware of. Yeah, everything depends on RPC, so that's a cool graph. And then I'm not going to walk through the details on this one, but I just want to run it real quick. So I love seeing stuff visually because there will be things you just will not notice or ever see until you do present it in a visual nature. And this is one of those. So basically what I just did is I walked all the help. Actually, if I do get help on something, you know, get help, help on get help, there is a related links section that has commands. So I just graphed all of the commandlets in base PowerShell and what they link to. So if I zoom in here, copy item property references set item property as related items. And while you see stuff clustered together, like you see stuff that's part of the same family of commands, get service, suspend service. I didn't even realize that was a thing there before. Stop service, set service. And then the fun one is the bugs that you find. If I zoom in here to get content, I notice it actually references itself twice. Like, is that kind of weird? So if I actually look at get help on the get content, no, not that one. Get help on get content, and I look at this list here, I see get content twice in the list. I never would have, actually, he's actually here 3 times. I might only be doing so I never would have noticed that or saw that before if I hadn't thrown up the diagram. So let's get back to.
Hey, Kevin.
So another question out there is, can you specify like a specific edge to be highly, more important than the other, or something like that?
If I was going to, so you can, right? Like, so one way is.
Or even to show like these edges are like a dotted line and those edges are a straight line, and.
Yes, you can do dotted lines, straight lines. You can do thickness, make them thicker or thinner. They might be the thinnest by default. You can change the arrow types at the end. In fact, let me hop out to here and documentation, node and graph attributes. So you can do your shapes that way. Nope. Your lines can be really weird. Like there's, yeah, there you do dotted, bold, dashed, solid, create borders. Like there is a wealth of settings in the attributes. Color gradients, use HTML colors versus the string friendly names. Here's all the ends you can use. So if you need an empty versus a triangle, whatever you want. I mean, there's lots of documentation for somebody to work through if they really want to do some cool stuff. Is really what it boils down to. You can tweak how the lines, they could be more right angles versus loopy. Quite often, I usually just say, I ask, Google, how do I do this with graph is? And I'll find like a Stack Overflow example of showing somebody doing that type of thing, if I can't identify it in the docs myself. All right, so that's my main set of examples. I have a couple more fun ones to kind of wrap us up here. I think it is it this one? Yeah, playing with Git. So for people that work with Git, the Git history is really just a directional graph. CD PSGraph. Okay, so I'm going to do some Git magic here to get like a log. Oh, how do I move this graph screen real fast? I'm doing a Git log in a special way to make it easy for me to parse, just to see the history. And I got some tokens here because splitting text parsing Git output's not fun. And I'm not going to walk through the details as much as more show you what we can do with it. So when I run this now, I actually have a diagram showing all my commit messages and when they got merged together. And I can build on that to show like more branch details. So let me load this one up. It should show me the branches for each one. So now I got like, short commit hashes and saying, oh, here was where that branch was. And here's where I have older branches that probably got merged, but I need to like prune these old ones, like just seeing this. Now, there's lots of great tools for showing the history of Git. So I'm not saying this is the best way to diagram your Git history, but more showing what's possible. And I teased you guys with this before, where you can create HTML links. And this is a scenario where I'm going to add a URL to this node that basically prefixes it with, the commit path. And if I inject in the commit ID, GitHub will take me to that commit, right? So if I adjust this and run this whole thing here, actually first let me save it to a variable. I'm actually going to generate two graphs. One is a PNG file to show the image. The second is a CMapX. I had no idea what that was, but it's basically like a mapping showing hot zones over an image. So if I just generate this mapx file, and then I actually do a little of HTML magic to actually just create an HTML file that contains those things, basically. When it runs now, I can go to any one of these commits, and if I click on it, let's see, it would be a good one. Adding allow clobber option. I don't know what I was doing there, but if I click on that, I can go to that commit directly from the diagram. So this could be, like, I'm just doing, you know, git commits here. This could be your server dashboard that goes to your performance page. Or, you know, like it could be a health check for something simple, but when you click on it, it can give you, you know, some web page you already have, especially if you have like a, like REST sites or using like, that new admin center. But anyways, but if you can craft a URL to go to something automatically and inject that in here, this is something you could generate on the fly to see what is happening at those instances. Now, well, that takes me as far as I'm kind of going to take PSGraph. I do need to plug a second module of mine, which is PSGraph Plus, which has a couple handy commands that take a lot of the demos that I did tonight and put them into commands that you can run as needed. So if you feel like you need to see the process, the what's connecting to what, you can actually just run this command and get those settings. But wait, there's more. I actually have support for targeting a remote computer. So I can actually put a server name in here. It will create a PS session to that computer, run what it needs to, pull the data back, and generate the graph locally. And you might also notice this supports an array. So I could actually give it a list of computer names in one graph to see, you know, what these 5 servers, what are they talking to? So I got a little bit more polish on these. My Git graph as well. I don't have the links in this one, but as I run this one, actually, let me come back to that one first. Let me do, so by default, I show like just the commit IDs and the branches. But I've added some parameters that we put the show the git commit message and the direction. And I've used this quite a bit to troubleshoot, you know, some scenarios that I've gotten into. So here's a scenario where I'm doing a dotted line to a commit to reference, like this is just like more of a comment about that. I'm keeping these on the same level by using a rank here. Like this message and this node are ranked the same to keep them side by side. Otherwise, they'd be floating off in different directions and wouldn't keep that relationship as tight as this is. So with that, and I have a simple one here that shows the AST command graph. Like, I don't know, if I have a module and I want to see what commands it calls, this guy parses the AST and shows me what calls what. So, you know, my graph command inside of it will call these convert to or get indents. And I can just see I got a clustering here of my graph commands and then my helper functions that kind of support the graphs. Export PSGraph, some argument completion type stuff. And oh, I also have, actually, I have a short command called show PSGraph, which is the same as the export PSGraph with the -show graph parameter. I should have retrofitted these examples to use that, but they're effectively, this one's effectively a wrapper for this other one. But yeah, I think that's also been mentioned, you know, you can do this for like your AWS or, where's my window go? Lost track of my screen. But yeah, if you're mapping your AWS stuff or your Azure stuff, I mean, it's all in the realm of possibilities. If you can query it and define your relationships, the graphs become the easiest part. So with that, we can open up to questions. If anybody else has anything they want me to touch base back on again, or they just need to let this sink in for a little bit. I know I've covered quite a bit of ground, but hopefully I had a little bit in there for everybody.
All right, let me just say that was amazing, dude. So there's so much awesomeness in that. Did you had opened in VS Code before a couple of demos, and I don't remember, did you ever get to the AD demo?
So I didn't do the AD demo in this one. And
if you want to skip it, that's fine. I was just curious about it.
So I have an AD demo here. The reason why I skipped it tonight is, one, I felt I was going long, but more so I don't have the VMs set up, like an Active Directory for me to query against.
Gotcha.
So if you want to run these, I have a demo prep that is, forewarned, it's destructive, right? Like it's creating, I don't know what I was doing, but I think I'm creating groups, creating users, create demo users. So I'm doing putting a lot of garbage in there in order to query stuff. Like creating groups with OUs. But the demo itself, the highlights is that I take the Active Directory users and groups and I build a chart of those relationships. So here I'm doing the AD groups using the distinguished name as my identifier, because that's just how I see the memberships listed. So I list the AD groups, I list the AD users, and I give it the label of the name, the title, and the department. Then for each group, we get the members, and as long as there are members, I draw edges from the member's distinguished name to the group distinguished name. I use a distinguished name because that was like my unique identifier that was on all the objects that I was querying. And then we're showing the graph. So I love this because this is the one graph that everybody wants to generate. The problem is, once you actually do generate this guy, he's a spaghetti monster. Like, all having 1,000 some nodes on the graph that all reference back to each other, you'll find it hard to see what's really going on. But I do take it further, and I said there's nothing wrong with generating for every group a graph showing the first and second level relationships. And that one's actually, I think that one's really impressive too, but I don't have my VMs set up on this box to do it. But so I'm basically doing a for each on the groups, and I'm graphing every group. And then to tie it together, I'm adding a URL to an HTML file that matches the name of the group. And I do that same hack where I'm creating an image on the fly. And what it would do is create a series of website pages that each one shows one group with the relationships, but they're all clickable to click onto the next group to show its same graph. I suppose I've kind of replaced this one with the git commit lookups since I didn't have my VM environments up and going. But so if you do have an Active Directory you can play with, this query actually is pretty generic. Like my get AD groups and users is, in this case, filtering on just an OU in my demo. So the querying of the data would be safe in your live environment if you wanted to see what that looks like against your environment. Cool. Yeah, so that's the guts of that demo. Like it's in my source, my repo. So if you want to experiment with any of these, they are published. All right. Is there anything else going on in chat?
So guys, let's just you all were muted earlier. Feel free if you would like to unmute. If you have anybody that wants to mention anything directly to Kevin, we don't have to stick to the chat at this point. I think Kevin's probably finished with demos.
Yep, that's as much demos I have. So.
Well, that was a lot, man. That was amazing.
Actually, I might have another set of, so we use this in, why'd that happen? If I search for DevOps, so I use this internally. Like, here's a scenario where for this one product, this one component, I have a diagram of the wide IP, for my load balancer, like my GTM pool, my GTM pool members, and how the virtual server connects to the pool members that talk to the pools to the individual servers. So here's a way that I can walk my load balancing configuration all the way from my F5, from my nodes to my pools to my GTM to the endpoints in a diagram. The green is stuff that was online when it ran. Then I have dependencies. This component is depended on by these things, and it depends on these other things. And then I got like network firewall rules that are showing how everything relates to everything else and the access available to those items. So those are like 3 real-world scenarios where we dynamically generate diagrams. And I don't have an example handy, but I have a similar one. Right now, we automate a lot of stuff, but security has to approve all like external firewall changes, right? Which makes sense. So we actually generate a diagram for them showing what changes we're putting in place. Like, these servers need to talk to these servers in these zones, and here is a diagram of those connections, the ports that we want open. So,
oh my God, that's genius, because we all know the security guys don't know what they're doing, right? So you give them a picture.
Well, that, and instead of looking at an Excel sheet of server names and IP addresses that might, at a glance, be hard to process, because you got to really think through what you're seeing. If I can get a diagram showing, oh, hey, it's actually these 6 servers in this zone trying to talk to this one server in this zone, and a nice clear diagram, it makes their job easier, and they can turn on those requests so much faster.
Yeah, I'm joke, but I mean, honestly, for a security person to have to walk into an environment that they don't play in every day, let's say, and just have to start understanding rules that are set up and how they function together, that's an amazing idea.
Yeah, so the scale of our environment, like we do a lot of automation, and we're DevOps. So we have few servers, but we deploy lots of components to things, and we have 280 deployable things. Like, somewhere a dev can make a change to any one of these 280 things, and then we kick off deployments to like one of, QA, dev, stage, production. And so we don't have Snowflake systems because we have to actually configure the exact same thing in every environment and for our pipelines to work. And we actually maintain firewall rules between each component individually. So of that 280 some components that are deployable, I've got firewall rules for each one telling me what other component it talks to. And when security said, hey, we want individual firewall rules for every little thing you do, we said, sure, no problem. And we generated them 1,000 some rules to process. And it was nice having the data to represent that, but then to help them actually comprehend what they were looking at, those diagrams just made a world of difference.
All right, gentlemen, the chat was going crazy before, and now everybody's gotten super quiet. Please, if you have a question for Kevin, let's take advantage of the time. I mean, I think all of us are just kind of blown away by the presentation. That was just awesome.
Yeah, there's a lot of people there just basically said that was really cool, and thank you very much. There's a lot of people that thank you, so I want to definitely say thank you for your time, and at least putting in all the time and effort that you did to put into this, and it's really gonna blow people's Friday or Thursday away to try and wrap their heads around it and try and play with it.
Much appreciated. I will be presenting on this actually, on the topic for the PowerShell Summit, I need to condense it down to like 30 minutes of content versus the, we're probably at what, an hour 20 now, give or take?
Yeah, so here's the sad thing for me. I am almost 100% positive that this is the demo that you're doing alongside me at Summit. So I would just suggest most people go to his presentation. That'll definitely be the better one. But man, wow.
I'll definitely reuse the best pieces from this one. I will probably have the Active Directory demo fleshed out and working. And I think the other one I have, I think is a nice strong hitter, I guess, would be I have some code that graphs the PowerShell flow, I guess, like the ASC. I actually map the ASC out, so an if statement would show the branches of codes and functions. And I have an advanced mode that explodes that out and does the ASC annotations for every single item in the script. So I think that's probably going to be one of my biggest things to flash and show off. Second to, I think, what the AD one looks like.
Well, I'll just reiterate what Phil said earlier. First of all, thanks for the time tonight. Super appreciative of the presentation and on trying to imagine the amount of time that went into making a tool like this. Just the interesting thing about the tool is there's a lot of options there, but there's nobody that sees this that doesn't come away with a bunch of different possibilities. It's not a tool set that's just limited to like doing one thing. It's really an idea starter for lots of other things, and that's the cool part.
Absolutely, that's one of my favorite things. Like, I unlock, your creative potential, and like I said early on, that the trick is finding data that actually has both your primary key and your reference lookup. Because when I did the org chart, right, if you can find data that your node name, if you can find data where your node name is the ID that is also a property that you can reference the ID, that will save you a ton of headache trying to figure out ways to map stuff together. And that's my magic. If I can find a way to get an ID and a lookup ID on an object, the graph is almost the easiest part.
So I was curious. Like the example you're showing here, this is a great example, but for your day-to-day stuff, is like HR relying on you guys to generate their org charts now?
The org charts, absolutely not. That was more of a proof of concept. I've only ever demoed that. I've never actually used that. Right.
Well, the reason I ask is because when you did that, the first thing I thought of is like, oh my God, what happens on day 2 after a Visio of an org chart is shown? It's out of date because someone quit, someone got promoted, someone left, right? So imagine being able to just like every day just regen all the company org charts, and they're always up to date within like 24 hours.
Absolutely. Like, you're right. So yeah, we have, we call it task runner, but a collection of nightly tasks that execute. And that's where I do something like this, right? If you're doing an org chart that the business is depending on, you set up a scheduled task that basically fires it off every night, and it will keep everything up to date as they make their changes throughout the day. Yeah, the value of that's pretty awesome.
So do you have automation downstream that says, like, hey, I produced these files? And do you have something that grabs those files and puts them where they need to be for the other pieces of the business to see it? Like, did you do all this work and then you sat there and dragged stuff into Confluence manually? I don't imagine that's the case.
No, I didn't. That Confluence page is auto-generated, but Confluence has there's a PS Confluence PowerShell commandlet or module. So we generate the diagrams and use the module to post and upload them in that case.
Mm-hmm.
And then like our firewall rules requests, like I'm talking about, that's also scripted and automated to create a ServiceNow request. So we generate the image, we use their API to create the request for ServiceNow and attach the image automatically, so we don't even have to think about it. You know, my team is definitely an automation first team. Like as we step into new projects and tasks, we almost automate it the first time before we deploy the first version of it. Because like I said, our snowflakes, we just have so many of them because they are in every environment that they truly aren't snowflakes as far as we're concerned.
So different than where I work.
And that's the DevOps team. I know on the infrastructure side, like, so like it's the economy of scale, right? I got these 280 components, but I can probably group them into 5 patterns. You know, most of them are API, some are static web pages, and it becomes a cookie cutter pattern there. But we also support multiple environments. So I mentioned like a dev, QA, stage, and production, but I think there's like often 4 or 5 others. So we just know if we're doing it once, we are doing this exact same thing at least, you know, 6 or more times. I mean, actually, in production, we have failovers, right? So it balloons pretty fast. So even if we intend it should have been a snowflake, it's worth it to build out the DSC or the script or the tooling to automate it because it won't be the last time. Now, on the actual infrastructure side, you know, when they're setting up shares or server-specific purposes, you know, they're more in that traditional model where, you know, they're under pressure to meet deadlines, and stuff to them is almost too unique to automate. So they will just go ahead and stand the system up, and then they'll just triage it later if they need to remediate problems or things of that nature. Like we're trying to we kind of meet in the middle. Like anything we can automate, we take off their hands and kind of take ownership over. But we as a DevOps team, we still depend on infrastructure quite a bit. You know, like Exchange, we will never take ownership of Exchange or Active Directory.
All right. So with that, guys, what I think I'd like to do is what we've been doing with these virtual chats is we've left the meeting open for 20 minutes or so, 30 minutes afterwards, just for people to conversate. But at some point, we need to end our recording. So let's give it we'll give everybody here another 2, maybe 5 minutes to get some questions in, and then we'll call it a day on the presentation. And then if you guys want to just conversate about anything, that's fine too. So last call for questions for Kevin.
Tell me about your prompt function there. My eyes keep on getting drawn to that.
My prod function.
Your prompt function.
Oh, my prompt? Oh, so in this case, get content function. Can I do this? Perfect. Let's go. All right, so we've got 2 things happening here. I think my prompt. So I think I have the PS Git module that's injecting this for me. So I'm in a Git branch, so it's adding that to my prompt. But what I also tend to do is I only show the current folder that I'm in. Actually, I have a lot of goodies in here, actually. Should I take that back? I think this is what I want to look at. Let me go pull up here. Code. Okay. Code profile. All right, we'll do my profile here. My actual prompt. This here does the status for Git. I do a fancy thing. I'm doing whatever. The console is automatically keeping a history, but I keep my own. So every time I run a command, I'm actually logging to a file the command and the execution time that it ran. So I've got history going back like 3 years of every PowerShell command I've executed. And then my prompt itself, I basically split the directory to just show the folder, the leaf of the location. And I set that as my prompt. So this here says I'm in the PSGraph folder somewhere in the structure of things. And then I will set the title, at least from the normal shell, to the full location. So over here, I can see I'm in C users K Marquette, although I'm only showing my username folder here. So if I cd into my workspace folder, cd PSGraph, what I found was that I don't like my prompts getting longer and longer and eventually wrapping all my commands. And I felt like it was just sufficient to know what folder I'm currently in. And if I ever need it, right, there's always the, get location that can, get location to tell me where I actually am if I ever need it. And then, while I think I would use that title bar, I really don't. I could probably drop that from my prompt function. So was that the answer to your question?
It does, thank you. The execution time is one of the things that that's nice about like Git history, things like that, but isn't included with PS readline history. So it's cool to log that. That makes sense. Thank you.
That and yeah, the start execution time is. I don't know. I always kind of for like auditing things, like knowing when I ran stuff, or I'll find myself I've basically written a script on the command line. If I just go open up that file, I can copy that out and start kind of working off that pretty easily. Yeah, that's my quick peek at my profile.
All right, so why don't we pause here for 1 second?